Mr. Rainwater, I'm not even going to get a creative question out. I need to know immediately because you just hit me with this topic 3 seconds before I hit record. What did you think of Midnight Mass?
Oh, I really like that show a lot. I don't even know, like, calling it a show doesn't feel appropriate because I mean it is kind of like just a really long movie, you know?
Yeah,
It's
I like
like
to refer to it as a story.
yeah, it's a good story. That's a
Fair
good way of
enough.
putting it.
Did it live up to the hype of me?
Yeah, it didn't actually
My
go
hype.
the way I thought it was going to go. I think for whatever reason, I came into it with the assumption that it was going to be like
A
a
cult.
slasher kind
Oh,
of thing, you know?
okay. Yeah.
Like it would have a lot more in common with Scream. And there are ways that I could maybe draw some parallels, but like um I know that okay, where do I even start? The setting is really good. I really
First of
like
all,
this.
first of all, spoiler alert, because there's no way we don't get into spoilers,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think Rainwater would agree with me here. One of the best things about the show for the first 3 or 4 episodes is not knowing what direction they're gonna go in terms of what specific horror aspect, because
Yeah.
when you kind of get started, I mean, and don't get me wrong, it is a theme that is prevalent throughout the show, but you kind of just think it's going to be a movie about a cult, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's pretty much where you think it's going to go, but it goes in a different direction. It swirls in another genre, I guess you could say, or a subgenre of horror. But used to great effect. So I just want to point out that if you have not seen Midnight Mass, it's on Netflix only. It is a limited series of like 6 episodes done by Mike
Yeah.
Flanagan. And it's worth your time, in my opinion,
Yeah.
and I think in Rainwater's opinion
Go
as
check
well.
it out before you listen to us talk about it, because I think yeah, I was surprised. I was really pleasantly surprised by that show. I will say though, I think it's episode 3 when you have the reveal, of like what's going on.
Yeah,
And
that sounds right.
I was actually like that episode. I was kind of disappointed because I was like, oh, it's a supernatural thing.
Hmm.
Like I didn't know how I was gonna feel about it, because once you bring in supernatural elements, it really, I okay, I'm trying to figure out how to talk about this within this show. I went into it with the expectation that a lot of the horror was going to be this like grounded sort of slasher or like mystery thing, and
Hmm.
there are mystery elements for certain, you know what I mean? But as soon as you find out like, okay, it's like, I'll just say a vampire. I mean, it's kind of basically a vampire. It's a demon, vampire, whatever.
It's a vampire. They never call it by that name,
Yeah.
which is one of the criticisms that I've seen thrown around on the internet. These people have
I
never heard of a vampire.
I kept saying that to myself. Like, it is odd because um and this gets way ahead of everything that goes on in the story, but it's kind of odd because it's like you see all these signals where you go, well, that's surely vampirism, right? Like your sensitivity to the sun, you have to feed on blood and all this other stuff, and it gets totally interpreted in a different way. So, and we can get into that in a little bit, but I I think what really got me into the show, and I think what are the story, and I think the strengths of it really lie in the way that it deals with all the characters. And
Hmm.
it's one of those things where I think really the mystery for a long time is sort of figuring out like, okay, well, who's the bad guy here?
Hmm.
Like, who's the villain? Because by the end of the story, just one
Bev.
person, yeah, that's like one person
That's it.
I could call a villain, but even then, she's not like. I mean, she has a lot of responsibility in what happens, but in a lot of ways, like the responsibility gets like dispersed through so many people.
Sure.
Where at a certain point, you could almost blame not the entire, but like a large majority of the village,
Hmm.
right? Where you go, okay, everybody had a hand in this, and everybody had a hand in like sort of bringing this whole fucking thing to a head, because
Mm-hmm.
they were too stuck like in their particular interpretation of the events that were taking place, and instead of like kind of seeing the signs for what they were, they rather really dug into what they felt was like this divine miracle that was happening before them. And I mean, in a sense, it is a miracle, but a bad miracle, not a good miracle, essentially.
Well, one of the things that I loved about it was how, and I talked about this in a previous episode where I was listening to that Boy Meets World podcast, and Writer Strong said the way you can tell good writing between bad writing is when good writing will allow each character to have their different point of view, whereas as you know what I mean, as opposed to just one singular vision. And in this show, every single point of view is justified. You have the doctor looking at it from a medical standpoint. You have the sheriff who's looking at it from the
my
standpoint.
favorite character in that show,
Yeah,
too,
where he's
is
just
great.
like refusing to investigate on the grounds that he doesn't want to be ostracized anymore because of his religion.
Yeah.
You know, like every single character has their different spin on, or not spin, but their own experience as to why it's happening, what is happening, how it's happening, the whole 9 yards, and each of them are represented. And it's so beautiful to watch two good guys argue with each other or discuss what's going on from different points of view and disagree with each other, but you know that they're good guys. Like when Miss Green, the teacher, who's very clearly the main character, I would say. You think it is right. You think it's Riley, but obviously that goes south pretty quick. Well, not pretty quick, but by the third episode, he's the hinge, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
In one of the greatest self-sacrifice hero deaths of all time, in my opinion.
Yeah,
because
that was such a great plot element too, because it was like, I think that was episode 4 or 5, where he's basically like, for him, it's entirely about, I just need to prove what is happening, and there's literally no other way of proving it.
Yes,
you have to just see it for yourself. Here's something unbelievable that's going to happen, and I have to die in order to show it to you.
And it was played for drama, and it was played for suspense in a horror film, which is the right way to do something like that, because she brings it up out in the middle of that boat. When they're in the middle of nowhere, it's like, there's nowhere for me to run. So if this is true, are you planning to kill me? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and we're still, as an audience member, we're isolated from the full explanation of what's going on and how it works. So we don't know if he's been overtaken by this urge so much so that is what he's planning to do.
Right.
Like, we know he's a good guy, but we don't know if he still is a good guy now that this has happened to him.
Well, and also thematically, this is another thing that the story does really well, is that it plays really well into Riley's entire arc, which is like part of his beginning issue was like he didn't have control over like his urges with alcohol, and he had this whole story that was sort of related to an inability to be conscious about what he was doing. And so like his entire arc is becoming about more conscious about his actions, about how it affects other people, and is now infected with this thing that makes him once again like unconscious, right? Like where I will have to crave blood. And he basically is like, well, fuck that. Like I already know what that's like. I don't want to do that. I don't like continue that cycle anymore, right? And so for him, there's only one way. I guess he looks at it as only one way out, which is like, I will make sure that I'm not continuing this, and I'll make sure that somebody who's very close to me knows what's going on so that they don't continue it, basically.
Right. And it's beautiful the way it happened. I mean, it's horrific, but it's also beautiful. Especially the way they kind of show his hallucination where he sees the young girl that he had killed instead of the woman that he loves, but she sees something very different. So again, it continues that idea of perspectives, and so we get to see he gets his redemption, and he gets this love and this overwhelming happiness in his final moments. But in his final moments, the woman he loves has this horrific experience, but it's to the effect. And in my opinion, none of the episodes in this are filler. Even when we're getting exposition,
Yeah.
it never feels like filler. Like I was never bored. I was gripped by this.
No, it's an extremely tight script, and I was surprised by how tight it was, especially once you start to get to the end and see how all the pieces fall into place, where it's like, oh, they set it on an island, because this is kind of the only way you could do this story is on an island, because you want to have everything self-contained, you want to have all these pieces fall into place, so you don't have like, oh, well, how does the vampire, get out and not get out and like spread to other communities, right?
Yeah.
So like, I thought, because there was a point where I was like, how the hell are they going to contain all this if, because it's kind of like it's basically like a zombie virus at a certain point where it's like, okay, well, if you get bitten by somebody, they can spread it to you, and then you have it spread to somebody else, and so it's a very simple and concise way of solving that, which is like, the hero characters have to burn the boats, right? And then by also the process of like the infected churchgoers like mentality, they start burning down all the houses too, right? And it's like, there are ways in which that whole plot element could be seen as contrived, but it worked incredibly well within the context of that story, because everything sort of, like you had talked about, I think last week, so much of this story is sort of based around how people interpret like religious scripture, where you can take it to mean one thing or another, and you get within that story, you get those two competing perspectives between the priest and between Bev, who is sort of like, Bev is like the orchestrator of like the really shitty way of looking at it.
But she can use it to justify literally anything.
Yeah.
Literally anything. And that, like, if there's one of my favorite movies, it doesn't get talked about that much. It's a movie called Book of Eli with Denzel Washington and Gary Oldman. And it's a post-apocalyptic movie in which Denzel Washington has one of the last copies of the Holy Bible in the post-apocalyptic world. He's blind, which is where it starts getting to be kind of a stretch, because he's like shooting people, and he's got like superpower kind of like daredevil senses and stuff like that. But the shtick about it is Gary Oldman is the villain trying to get his hands on the Bible, only for the reason that he knows if he can get his hands on it, he can manipulate not only how it's interpreted, but literally what it says. You know what I mean? And so that kind of, fanaticism that ends up happening, like in Midnight Mass or whatever, can be seen by some as a weapon. Like, it is a tool for people to manipulate other people. And I think it's beautifully executed here, because you have Bev, who does it for selfish intentions. It usually serves her in the end.
Yeah.
And then you have Monsignor Pruitt, the priest, who's also kind of doing it for selfish reasons, but he has more altruistic intentions overall to help people. Do you know what I mean? He's not looking to help himself. Yes, there's a rooted desire in him to, save the woman he loves and, have the life that he didn't get to have.
There are layers to his actions that aren't obvious until the very end.
Right. And that's one of the more beautiful reveals too, is that you find out, oh, okay, so this is what it is. He's not just, obsessed with power or the celebrity that came with, healing people and doing all these great things. Like, he had a more pure motive behind it all. Whereas Bev is out here fucking poisoning dogs and shit from the get-go. So it's like, you know what I mean? Like, she's the least questionable of whether or not she's a good person. And it comes down to the wire too, like all the way down to the I believe she's one of the few people that we really see burn when the sun comes up. You know what I mean? Like, and it's a memorable shot about what happens to her, because we kind of want that, because even after the last moments of the story's pretty much wrapped up, everyone else on the island has kind of come to terms with what they've done wrong, and accepted and acknowledged that, whereas she is refusing to do it, to the point where she's just, I just remember the part when she shoots the sheriff and she's like, dirty blood, and the sheriff laughs at her because at this point, with all this crazy shit goes on, she's still racist. And it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just it's shocking to me to watch it and be like, wow, there's vampires and people are getting like their heads decapitated and everything's on fire, but no, let's still be racist. That's important too. And you know what I mean? So like, she's really kind of the villain to me in this, because even when there are times when Monsignor Pruitt is questioning whether or not what he's doing is right, because he does struggle with the miracle and the idea of the angel, you know what I mean? He is kind of at grips with addiction, kind of like how Riley was.
Right.
He struggles with whether or not it is wrong, and she is always the one that whispers in his ear and finds a way to justify and continue
she's an
it.
enabler. Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, that's the whole, that is part of that whole dynamic, is like Bev is the enabler because she's also, in some ways, Pruitt is her enabler as well. They both enable each other into their delusions. But like, Pruitt, on the one hand, I think he doesn't look at it in a like condescending or like a conniving way, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's just like, well, she's a parishioner, she's a child of God like everybody else, you know, I trust her implicitly. Bev's just like, I can angle you to be useful to me ultimately, you know.
Yeah.
And because she sees herself as like this basically like this mythological figure, right? Like, she's part of the end time. She's one of the crucial people who are going to bring about, you know, the second coming, or however she kind of perceives it in her mind, right? Because like, by the end, when she's like put together the entire like safe house and all that stuff, like, that's when you go full cult. That's when you're full cult mode.
Yeah.
Is when you have like a fucking safe house.
We all have a bed here.
Yeah.
Like, very little else. So I'm curious to know, well, first of all, I didn't need to toot my own horn for a second here. I'm at the very least 2 for 2 with recommendations on you, right? Because Atlanta was solid.
Oh yeah.
And then this, so
Yeah, yep.
I'm 2 for 2 on recommendations.
You got good recommendations, Joe.
I'm curious to know for you who your favorite character was, top to bottom.
I mean, I think,
Because it's an ensemble.
I know overall, because I like a lot of the characters, but I think overall I just really liked the sheriff's story. I really liked that he was somebody who just like immediately saw through so much of the bullshit and like played that sort of I'm going to stand back and kind of watch how this plays out, and does that kind of all the way to the point that he needs to act. You know what I mean? Like, I think part of his character that I really admired a lot was that so much of it was about restraint as a form of justice in action, where it's like, I recognize how much power I have in this community, and I have to use it in the most like justified form or way of doing it, right? I have to be able to listen to what everybody's saying. I have to be neutral insofar as I can be neutral. And he is like the most neutral like person on the island. Yeah. Because he has no like, he's not part of that church. He's not part of the community in that sense. And he really exists almost like in some ways in regards to his occupation, he is a foreigner to the people in the community because he has to be. If you're going to serve that role, you have to have like a completely objective and removed sort of
You have to keep everybody at arm's length. Yeah.
Yeah. And it all kind of like comes into play so well with his actual backstory when he's talking about like I've done so much to try and like prove to people that like I'm part of the team, like I'm here to help,
Mm-hmm.
and getting constantly rejected, and then ending up like on that island because that would be the one place where even if he got rejected, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, like that was going to be the least amount of bullshit to have to deal with. And then when you throw in everything that happens with his son, suddenly that throws such an interesting tension, because like he has to figure out how to continue to be this like fair kind of guy, right? Like that's his whole thing, is like, how can I be fair? How can I exemplify justice in this community? And he kind of does it all the way to the very end. You know what I mean? Like he does. What are you gonna say?
He is flawed, though, to some extent, because he does not, while he is open-minded in public about what his son decides to do in terms of religion,
Yeah.
when they're at home, he is very...
Oh yeah.
He's very...
The one space where he has any kind of control is in his home, and so
Yeah.
he's like, you're not bringing that Christian bullshit into my head.
He's not even like opening it. He doesn't really open it up for discussion. He flat out tells his son, "You are Muslim.
Yeah.
You are like, you don't have a choice in it." And you know what I mean? Like, and I liked that it didn't necessarily make him a villain. It didn't make him a bad guy, but it was a flaw that, even though he's so open-minded in his job role when it came to his family life, he was a little bit more closed-minded, and it reflects easily to the death of his wife.
Yeah.
Which, they go into a little bit, and they allude to how religion tied into that and how he kind of views religion since there. It's almost like he feels stuck with his religion because...
It's his comfort blanket, which is usually the case with most people in religion.
Sure.
It's a comforting thing. The same thing with... is her name Green? Like her last name's Green? I can't remember her first name.
Miss Green, the Kate Flanagan.
Yeah, like this is the same thing with her. She's very transparent about it too in the story. I feel like because Riley kind of grills her on it, because he's like, why are you getting back into this bullshit? And she's very upfront about like, yeah, I mean, it's just been very comforting to me. I've gone through all this crap in my life, and this is the one thing that sort of serves a purpose that helps me feel really grounded, right? Because she's gone through a shitty relationship. She's going to be a mother, she's going through all this chaos, and then also like her past trauma with her mom, right? So it's like, it's the one part of her life where she can feel some sort of comfort. And so, yeah, I mean, both her and the sheriff both kind of have that sort of thing going on, right?
Mm.
And, but yeah, I think the sheriff was the one that I definitely like related to the most, probably. What about for you, Joe?
Oh, it's absolutely Riley. He starts us off, and the whole, I guess it's because my brain is unhaunted, the film that I'm producing, and that kind of mindset, that heavy set guilt that people struggle with internally, externally, however you want to look at it, to see it so well executed. It's different than how I did it, but it's so beautifully executed that I enjoy watching it. I don't have to feel jealous of it, and I'm watching it and I'm just thinking, wow, this is a masterclass in storytelling, because I mean, he's very clearly depressed. Doesn't matter that he served his time in jail and all that kind of stuff. He comes home and he's clearly depressed, and he deals with various elements in his community, and it's not all sunshine and rainbows. You know what I mean? Like, his mom is very much putting on a smile and happy that he's home, and all that kind of stuff. She's just kind of brushing off that, the terrible thing that he did. And Dad almost doesn't want anything to do with him.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? And it's also mind-blowing that the dad is the kid from E.T. I don't know if you knew that.
I had no idea. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, Elliot is his dad. Um, but you know what I mean? Like, so like everybody has their different viewpoint on him. So it kind of like how you said both the sheriff and Aaron Green were your kind of top two. My other top one is in fact Monsignor Pruitt, the priest.
Yeah, no, he's a really good. Both. I mean, it is like you were saying. Like there, I think the show's really rich with so many good characters. It's hard to pick a favorite because like I like Pruitt a lot as well. He is such a complicated character, and I think what makes him so interesting is you see him exhibit so much of this good-heartedness and compassion and carries it out like even during like the most stressful times, right? Like it's really not to cut you off, I just there's one particular point towards the end of the story where like everybody's now a vampire and it's just gone full chaos, and Pruitt has this moment of like revelation where he's like, oh, this did not go how I wanted it to go. This didn't go like I planned it to go. Like I just wanted to stop suffering. And that was my whole plan the whole time. And I think that it sums up how he behaves and acts throughout the story up to that point. You know what I mean? Like he never is like, he's never a shitty dude. He just, when he does stuff that's like horrible, it's because he's taken over by like a supernatural impulse, basically.
Yeah. So like, I think you're kind of referencing when, oh God, what's his name? He's in Halloween Kills. I'm trying to remember what his name is in the actual.
Is it Joey or
the drunk who shot the girl?
Yep.
I've watched this show so many times, and I can't even tell you what his name is. Not Joe Galley. God, I can hear the little girl's monologue when she busts into his trailer. Right. I hate you.
Oh, that monologue's incredible. That is such a good fucking arc. That alone could be its own story arc, you know, within a given series. And I think the fact that the show ties so many different ones together.
Joe Colley.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, when Joe Colley slips and like busts his head open, and then he's like, Pruitt's compelled, right?
Yeah.
Like feed on the blood that's dripping out of his head.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, Pruitt's such an interesting character too in that sense because, there's the mystery around it, right? Like, what happened to the old priest? Where did he go? Why is he missing? And then you find out, right? Well, it's actually him because he's de-aged. Yeah. But beyond that, like, you just see the way that he behaves in the community and what he means to the community. Like, he's clearly, in that way, like, him and the sheriff sort of counterpoint each other, where they both serve these really important functions to the community. And, I mean, it's interesting because Joe, I've already forgotten his name, the drunkard. Joe Colley ends up kind of leaning on both of them in times of trouble. And that's something that they don't really play up too much, but you kind of see at the beginning of the story is that the sheriff really has formed a relationship with Joe over time because he's come in to kind of like help sober up and like
they're both kind of outcasts.
Yeah, exactly. And you get the sense when Joe dies that like the sheriff really misses his absence because that was one of the few people that he could like actively spend time with on a regular day-to-day basis because otherwise people didn't really trust the sheriff fully. You know?
And there's not a whole lot of trouble on the island. Yep. Joe Colley was the only one who quote unquote started trouble, and it was only because he kept drinking because he was struggling with, you know, his past actions. But that guy gave a great performance as well. Robert Longstreet, I believe his name is, as Joe Colley, and that was really, you know, a wonderful performance. The girl that played Lisa gave a great performance. The only performance that I think that really kind of bothered me was the mayor. and I think he was supposed to bother me. He comes off very annoying.
He's
Um,
really weird. I think that's what it is. It's just kind of like that character is weird in the sense that he's kind of doing what a lot of the other, like Riley's parents are kind of acting in this way, where it's just very like innocent,
mhm.
like innocent island, church going, just blue collar kind of people. But he comes off as so like, I don't know, like kind of dopey, basically.
Yeah, and he's always got some kind of like political or some kind of motive behind everything that he's doing. Like he is trying to persuade people. There's a wonderful sequence in the start of episode 2 when they're on the beach and they find all the dead cats.
Mm.
By the way, if you didn't realize that was all a single take, which is fucking mind
Yeah,
blowing to
yeah,
me.
that was a really good scene.
But he's constantly trying to get the sheriff to attend mass at the church, and you know what I mean. Like that just made me so annoyed, and I'm assuming that that's the intention.
Oh yeah, for
One
sure.
of the things that I absolutely want to talk about is Mike Flanagan himself, who is the writer, director, executive producer of this. This is, dare I say, his opus, right? We talk about this a little bit in the past about like the one thing every artist really wants to do and they're waiting for the chance to do it and they always talk about it. In 2011, 2013, somewhere in there, another movie that I would recommend, save it for Halloween though, or October, is another Netflix exclusive by Mike Flanagan, starring the same woman that plays Erin Green, Kate Flanagan, who is his wife, called Hush.
Okay.
And the Hush is about a deaf writer who goes into the woods to write her new book. She's got a cabin in the woods, and a serial killer kills her neighbor. And it's like the woods, so they don't have a lot of neighbors, but like
Yep.
the closest person to her. And she's in this house in the middle of the woods all by herself, and the killer's outside or whatever, and it's just about this deaf woman who can't hear somebody sneaking up behind her trying to figure out a way to get away from this killer. The book that she's writing at that point in time, you guessed it, Midnight Mass. That's the name of the book that she's working on.
Interesting.
A few years later, Mike Flanagan adapts a Stephen King short story, I believe it is, called Gerald's Game, in
Okay.
which a woman or I think it's Carla Giaguano, Carlo, something like that. And the guy who plays Commander Pike in the new Star Trek movies. They're lovers, and they're trying to spice it up in the bedroom a little bit. And the woman allows herself to be handcuffed to the bedposts. And after that happens, the man has a heart attack and falls off the bed. So she is stuck to the bed in the middle of like a cabin getaway and can't get out. And like the whole thing is like a nightmare scenario. Like, what do you do? How do you get out? Etc. Above the bed that she's stuck is a bookshelf, and what's on that bookshelf? Midnight Mass. So to say it's a long time coming from Mike Flanagan is to say the least. You know what I mean? Like you could see the book in the first movie and be like, oh, that's a cool name for a book. Then you see it again and you start going, oh, something's going on here.
He's been planning this.
Yeah. So he's been working on this for quite a long time. And one of the things that I think is beautiful about it is I rewatch it every couple of months. I think I'm on my 5th or 6th rewatch of the series. I love it. And it pays off. It works, by the way. You catch more things upon rewatches that you go, oh, I see how did I miss that before? Like all that kind of good shit.
Yeah.
And I started to notice with this series how many movies Mike Flanagan has done that I've looked at and gone, that was a lot fucking better than it ever should have been. So he did the sequel to The Shining that came out with Ewan McGregor in the last year or two called Dr. Sleep.
Yeah.
He also did the Ouija movie, the Ouija board that was like produced by Hasbro. Yeah. He did another, I think it was one of the, I want to say it was like one of the Annabelle prequel movies, like the Conjuring prequel movies or something. Don't hold me to that, but I think he did. Either way, every time I watch a movie, like I've started seeking out all of his work just to be like shocked. Every time it gets better. I watch something and I'm like, this is gonna be the shit one that he did, and it's never. It's at above at best on average, it is better than some movie that you go to the movies for and think, oh, this might be good, and you walk away disappointed. I've never been disappointed. I'm not always blown away, but I've never been disappointed with his work. Even the ones, and I'm sure you've seen it, like in the commercials when they have like the CGI jaw for like a ghost when someone gets possessed. He did one of those movies, and when I watched it, I'm like, that's the best fucking use of that CGI effect that I have seen yet. Like, that's the only time I don't have a problem with it. What I've noticed, he has a knack for Stephen King things. Dr. Sleep, Gerald's Game. So when I'm watching this, I don't know if you noticed this. You're shaking your head yes, so I'm thinking you might have. I noticed, or at least I assume, I can't wait to ask him this. I'm going to see him in September. He's coming to a local horror fest. This movie, or this series story, is kind of like a have of Salem's Lot, which is one of my favorite things, and The Mist. Both Stephen King properties. They're like fused into one thing here.
Like that one character in The Mist,
Mrs. Carmody. Mrs. Carmody from played by Marsha Gay Harden.
Yeah, I was thinking about that a lot actually when I was watching Midnight Masses. It reminded me a lot of The Mist in some ways in regards.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Especially the ending feels very Stephen King like too. When you suddenly have all these people kind of caught in this horrific scenario and then kind of coming to awareness of what's going on and trying to refine their humanity despite everything that's happening. Like it's a very it's definitely not common in all Stephen King stories, but it does happen from time to time for sure.
I feel like he's the guy that does. He's the next Frank Darabont, because Frank Darabont was the guy who did Stephen King stories the best before anybody else. He did Shawshank, he did Green Mile, he did The Mist. Like that's Stephen King on point. But now Frank Darabont doesn't make movies anymore, from what I can tell. I think Mike Flanagan picked up that baton. I'm very curious to see what he does. It's coming out this year, I believe, in late September or October. He's now doing Edgar Allan Poe. He's doing the Fall of the House of Usher.
Cool.
So I'm very much excited to see that. But I guess he's been planning this for quite some time, and this is one of the few times. The only other time I can think of something that lived up to the wait. And it wasn't even a wait for the audience; it was a wait for the artist. Was Christopher Nolan's Inception. Because that was kind of his baby for a real long time. He kind of sat with that. And I'm wondering if we finally hit an era, if you will, where artists are making their quote-unquote opus and firing on all cylinders. Like, I'm wondering, do you know, and we're off topic now, but I'm curious to know your point of view, because maybe you've seen some artists that have had similar successes, but I'm wondering if things like the internet, do you know what I mean? Or accessibility to art has made artists able to study more things, see more flaws, see more successes, and kind of narrow in on their things better. Right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it makes it easier for somebody also to go through that process and just even filter out even ever having to go through any kind of mainstream type process. I found on my Discord for Trailer Park Warlock, one of the people that hangs out with me there actually recommended this show on the internet called The Big Les Show, and I was like, okay, I'll check it out. And it turns out it's awesome. I mean, it's this Australian cartoon that was animated pretty much entirely through Microsoft Paint. So it looks very simple, right? And it is very simple the way the whole thing's put together, but the people who write the story and make it, you get to watch this process of this simple kind of flash animation slowly turn into this person's like kind of magnum opus, sort of. Even though it's like largely, it's very much like comic strip kind of humor, where you have a Sasquatch character, very, which puts it kind of in common with Trailer Park Warlock, but like you have like all these kind of characters that sort of recur, almost like Family Guy or something, like an animated sitcom kind of situation. But the way that they take the story, it goes in all these situations. It goes into all these kind of different scenarios where you actually have like surprisingly psychedelic moments, surprisingly like personal moments, and that's the kind of thing that you could never do previously, like on TV. Like you couldn't just veer off and go in an unexpected direction, because you'd have to go through like an executive producer or whoever that would say like, oh, well, our audience wouldn't like that. That's too risky, blah, blah, blah.
That doesn't work. That's not what we bought.
Yeah, and I think that's what it is like people are just able to take more risks now. And I don't know if that's going to stay the same with Netflix, right? Like, I think Mike Flanagan got into a very fortunate, like very good timing, that he was able to be making some stuff with Netflix at a time when Netflix was having a very hands-off, like, you do you policy. And unfortunately, that might be changing because Netflix is really having to tighten their budget. They're having to totally rethink how they're going to be making money with their model. But to me, that was always sort of the appeal. That was like always sort of the appeal with Netflix in particular, was that you would get series that were kind of outside of the norm. And like HBO tries to do that too, but like I think of the series that sort of stand out right now as like things that would not have existed prior to streaming services, and I think they're all kind of on Netflix right now. But anyway, that's a whole side tangent to sort of talk about. In regards to what you're saying, it is, I think, a matter of taking risk. And it's easier right now to take a lot of risks and put it out there. And like Mike Flanagan couldn't really do it like this necessarily, but there's so many people who are publishing on YouTube or through all sorts of other venues who are able to just like give zero fucks and just see what happens.
Yeah. And that's sometimes, and executives don't like that when that's gambling to them with money, but at the same time, all art is feasibly gambling. So, you know what I mean? Like, they just like to repeat the same shit that they know has worked, not necessarily will continue to work. But yeah, I just didn't, to me, it was very enlightening to watch something that someone had held so preciously for so long. And for me, and I'm only speaking for myself here because I've heard other people say that they didn't care for the series. For me, fired on all cylinders. I think this show, this series, this story is itself perfect. Do I think everything should be this? Absolutely not. But in terms of what I think was the artist's intent, how it was executed, all that kind of stuff, like what it is, perfect. I don't want a sequel. I don't want a prequel. It's like when you eat a perfect meal, you don't want dessert. You know what I mean? Like you just sit there and you go, damn, that was good. Maybe I'll have that again in a couple months. That might be my birthday dinner. Like, you know what I mean? Like you'll revisit it, but you don't need more of it. Like people are always talking about, oh, we need a sequel. Oh, we need more seasons. Oh, we need this. Oh, we need that. Not always. Like sometimes it just gets to the perfect point where you're like, wow, that was fulfilling for me. And I'm shocked that someone was able to do it with their opus. Whether or not that actually is his opus, I don't know. That might be a question that I'll end up asking him.
It's clearly a story that he's been wanting to do for a while, though. That's for sure.
I've the only piece of merchandise that I can find on it, and I'm currently halfway through reading it, is a nice big art book, The Art of Midnight Mass, which I was so happy that it was that. But it goes into everything. It goes into his history. It goes into the characters. It goes into the set building, the camera movements, the color design, the lighting design, like every little bit of the entire thing. It's not just, like the Marvel bangs out, here's a book of all the concept art we came up with. You know what I mean? Like, and that's usually what that is. This actually went in deep as to some of the stuff that they did. And it was very, like I said, I'm only like halfway through it, but I'm loving every inch of it. I'm curious to know from you, what were your thoughts on, and this is how they refer to him as in the book, even though they talk about vampires, the Angel. Like, when you saw it, what was your reaction? What was your thoughts? Did you have any criticisms about like the design or how he's handled or anything like that?
No, I like the design a lot, actually, and I thought, I mean, the only way that the premise even works really is by having the vampire, whatever the fuck he is, look that way. You know, like if he didn't have wings, it wouldn't work. Like it was predicated on Pruitt's misinterpretation of what he was looking at. If it's even, like a person could make the argument that yes, it is an angel, and that's just how angels are. They're fucked up, or whatever, It's not, and I guess that's the thing, is it's not super important how you classify what kind of monster it is, It's just that you need to know that this is the thing that causes everything to happen, right?
Yeah.
Like, there are some aspects about the personality of the monster that I found kind of funny, where it's like, whenever he's feeding, like he just cannot focus on anything concerning bodily harm. Like he gets shot at, he gets burned,
and he just kind of like, leave me alone.
Yeah, like I thought that was pretty funny. And I don't feel like I don't know if it was intentionally meant to be funny, but to me it was like, that was a little bit, it was a little bit goofy and a little bit like, there are parts where it felt a little bit contrived, because it's like you have to have it that way in order for you to kind of close it out with Aaron ripping his wings so that he can't fly away, Yep,
that was a setup and payoff, absolutely.
Yeah, and
see, to me, but before you go on, I just wanted to give you my interpretation of it, was that he's so strong that these things didn't really bother him. You know what I mean? It wasn't so much that he was more concerned with feeding. It was more so that, like, an ego thing, or it was just bothersome to him. It wasn't really threatening.
One way I looked at it, and I felt like another idea that might have been going on there was like, that was how powerful his craving or lust was. That he was not paying attention to his own bodily, like,
I could see where that
safety.
could. Yeah, I could see that too.
It's almost like a hubris thing, right? Where it's like, nobody's ever fucking threatened me. Why should I ever feel threatened by any of this bullshit?
Look at how long I've lived. Yeah, absolutely.
It never occurs to him to be outsmarted or anything. But what were you gonna say, Joe?
The one thing that pissed me off about him and the vampires, though, is, and I was talking about this before, the 1979 TV miniseries Salem's Lot, directed by Tobe Hooper, is one of my favorite things. It's one of the scariest fucking things in the entire world. If you've never seen it, it is absolutely terrifying, with Reggie Nadler basically playing a Nosferatu, but he's blue. But the vampires in that fucking movie or miniseries, it's like 3 episodes. It's only like 3 hours long, so it could be considered a movie by today's standards. It's sold as a movie nowadays. Is one of the scariest fucking things. But one of the things that I loved about it, that I've tried to figure out how they did, and despite scouring the internet for days, the vampires had reflective eyes, like that cat-like eye, like the light shines and it reflects, and they used that here in Midnight Mass to illustrate when someone's a vampire. And it was something I was going to do in Haunted, and now I'm struggling with whether or not I want to do it still. Probably will, but that was the only critique that I had in terms of the vampires. You know what I mean? Like,
you're saying like it was a borrowed element from Salem's Lot.
Correct. It's not even a borrowed. It's like a straight rip off. Like, it's one of the main things about Salem's Lot's vampires is they don't really. I mean, the head vampire, and oddly enough, the angel looks very much like the head vampire, Mr. Barlow in Salem's Lot.
Okay.
The only difference is he's not blue, which the vampire in that series is blue, and the vampire in that series has. I don't know if Nosferatu has. I never paid that close attention, but like normally the two. Like I don't know what they're called.
The canines.
Canines, yeah.
Yeah.
Those are the vampire teeth.
Yeah.
Whereas in Salem's Lot, it's the two front teeth.
Oh, okay.
That are
Yeah, I think the original Nosferatu had it like that. I'm pretty sure.
Okay. So Salem's Lot ripped that off from Nosferatu, and Midnight Mass ripped this off from Salem's Lot. So I guess that, it's one of those things that people just borrow from each other because they haven't seen. But yeah, that was the only real caveat that I had for the angel. But the way that they introduce the angel each time is always so perfect. The scene is so great when the sheriff and his son are having that discussion and they talk about the mom's death and faith and this and that. And then all of a sudden, boom, the light turns off and the face is in the window.
Yeah.
Like that shit caught me off guard. Like I was so into the scene otherwise and I forgot that I was watching a horror property. And that's one of the beautiful things that I loved about this show. But I think the biggest and best reveal is when you find out he's at the mass at the end.
Yeah.
When he's standing in the back by the door when the sheriff's about to leave. And the way they handle it is so well done. You know what I mean? It's a jump scare without being a jump scare. It's not something popping out at you.
It's a very, like, oh shit kind of moment. Because for me, I was just like, yeah, I was waiting to see what happened. Like, how does the sheriff leave? And it's like, oh, no, he's not leaving. Like, we're now fully into the shit,
Yeah, and that's one of the wonderful reasons about how they blended two subgenres of a cult movie and a vampire movie is that when the cult stuff is ramped up to 10, you're like, okay, well, now it's got to die down. It can't go any higher than this. That's when you bring in the vampire element for a hard left turn and you go to 11 because, you know what I mean? It empowers the subgenre that has less screen time. Do you know what I mean? By saying, oh, this was bad, this is how it gets worse. And that's one of the beautiful things about how this thing is structured from the start. You know what I mean? Like, I could gush about this show all day, folks. I'm sorry. But we're coming down to the end. So I wanted to know your overall thoughts about how you as an artist will take maybe some things from this. Did you learn anything? Did you pick up on anything, like storytelling techniques?
There's so much to learn from that show in terms of story structure and in terms of the way it does characters is the way that I love to do characters, and so it kind of just, I think it solidified a lot of things that I've been thinking about in regards to how I think about writing characters in the story.
Isn't that the best when you have an idea and someone else does it and it validates your idea and you're like, oh, that does work.
Yeah, because that story does it in a way that is much better than I've ever been able to do it. So it's sort of like, oh, okay, I get to see
I can get
what
there.
that skill looks like, right, at a greater level, Because it's one thing to sort of like have multiple perspectives throughout a story. It's a whole other thing to be able to do it in a way where it's so seamlessly tied together, where you can literally have a perspective. You can have an arc and a perspective for every single primary and secondary character. Because like even Riley's mom, who doesn't really do that much through the series, has her own moment. And it's a really powerful moment, too, because it's like basically her really pronouncing her own faith, basically, and at the same time kind of telling Bev to fuck off,
I like a word with Bev is one of my favorite lines in the whole show.
Yeah. But it's how I would want to be able to write stories going forward, for sure. To be able to treat every single character with that kind of like care. Yeah, I guess that's the only way of putting it.
I'm in full agreement. I think that was my biggest takeaway. And so to kind of wrap everything up here and to tie everything together, I was watching I keep seeing promos about it and I get pissed off because it's not out yet, at least at the time of this recording. There's a movie coming out on Netflix called The Gray Man, directed by the Russo brothers,
Okay.
who are notably known for, they were basically one of the biggest creative forces behind Arrested Development, Community, and several of the Marvel movies, including Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. They were the directors of both of those films. And they were doing interviews about the Gray Man, and of course people were asking about their past work and stuff like that. And I remember one of them talking about their process, and they were talking about how the Infinity War and Endgame being shot back to back almost killed them, because in their process, one of the things about modern technology now is that filmmaking, you shoot something on digital, at the end of the day, you send the hard drive over to the editor, and overnight the editor will throw it together in the editing bay and just do a rough cut. You wake up the next morning, you can watch the scene that you just shot the next day that's, pretty close to a really good edit. So what they would do is, when they were filming, they would do that and wake up the next day and go, oh, that's not working. Or, ooh, what if we add this? Oh, that'll make it better for this character, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking about this, and they talked about that whole revision while you're going. And I thought about that, and I thought about how we talked about like the opus idea, where an idea sits with an artist for a long time. And it started occurring to me, and I've said this before in the past, I realized that my strength, or my works got better because writing is rewriting, right? Like every time I reread a draft, I would be like, oh, no, I know how to change that. I know why that's not working. What was I doing there? I can't read it. I don't understand it. Maybe no one else is. Blah, 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 blah. So I'm starting to think, and this is the beautiful thing about Midnight Mass, is they were one of, if not the first productions to be up and going during COVID, like 2020. They in the shit, they were the ones doing it. And it worked because they were doing an isolated story on an island. So it was like, oh, we don't need a ton of extras. Oh, we don't need to, you know what I mean? So that worked for the story, or for the production, I should say. But the idea that Mike Flanagan's been working on this so long, and the idea that I've come around to writing is rewriting, and then the Russo brothers talking about revising as they go. Do you know what I mean? I'm starting to come of the mind that the longer you do work on a project, the better it can get. And I'm starting to question whether or not you can do it too much. Because for all intents and purposes, everything that I've seen that people just keep working on and revising and chipping away and adding a little bit more and tweaking gets better. I don't know. I think it's better for the art, not necessarily for the artist. I think that's what wears down on us, but what makes the art better. And that's what destroys an artist eventually. But we are doing it for that work to live beyond us. So to me, this is the kind of thing that justifies what I've been thinking in my head, where I've been struggling with the idea of Haunted. I've been like, I got to get this fucking movie made. I wrote it in 2016. Like, it's 2022. Let's get shit or get off the pot. But for the last few years, because I've been having so many trouble getting it off the ground, I keep rewriting, I keep revisiting, I keep watching things like Midnight Mass, and how you just said it justifies and validates ideas that I was having, and I see them illustrated and I go, oh, that's how they did that. Or another idea will go, oh, I know how to do that better because I've seen that now. You know what I mean? Or this won't work, or whatever like that. So I've been able to revise my script more and more and more and more. And I'm starting to come of the mind that that revision and that working on a piece should not be justified by arbitrary deadlines that are motivated by money. Right?
Ideally, you want to be in that position for sure.
Yeah, that's a luxury. Don't get me wrong, but
yeah, it is, and at a certain point, also like death is a reality. So I guess that's. I think that's the thing. I think for me, that's sort of where I always kind of come at it from, is like, well, I'm gonna be dead one of these days, so I might as well just get done and get out of my head what's already there. You know, I haven't yet. I mean, I haven't yet personally. I definitely agree with what you're saying, that redrafting, you can't go wrong. I feel like let's say that I have known people in my life who have redrafted so much that they start to doubt themselves. And not everybody's like that, but some people can have that tendency where the more that they redraft, the more that they start to second guess and sort of go, oh, maybe the reason why I keep redrafting is because I have no idea what I'm doing.
And I'm so glad you said that, because the part that I wanted to cut in with was, I don't think you should redraft for the sake of redrafting.
Yeah.
I think you should redraft because you have an idea and you know how to refine it better or illustrate it better or say it better. Do you know what I mean? It's not about what you're doing, it's about how you're doing. Like, that's the reason you revise. Is not is not to redefine what it is that you're doing, but to refine how it's being done.
Yeah.
Because we've talked about in the past, storytelling is really, it all lies in the execution. You could have a good story and it could be told terribly and it'll fucking suck. And you could have a really simple, basic, just bones story, and if you tell it really well, it's fucking great.
Yeah.
And I think that's really where it comes down to. So I just want to tell all the artists that may be listening to us, you know what I mean? When you go into revisions, it should be with intent.
Yeah.
With an idea, with not, oh, how do I make this better? Or how do I make this good? It's how do I do what I wanted to do better? And I know what I want to do and I want to try it out and see if it works. And that's where you should come from, as opposed to, how do I make people happy or interested or blah, blah, blah. That's all bullshit. But anyway, I think we've gushed along about this now. Thank you so much for watching all my recommendations. Whiplash. I'm 3 for 3.
Yeah.
Whiplash.
A couple of movies. I also saw First Man recently too, so I'm I'm working through your playlist basically.
All right, so maybe we'll talk about that in a further episode. I'm excited. I'd have to re-watch that one. I don't watch that one nearly as much as Whiplash, Atlanta, or Midnight Mass, but I do occasionally put that one on. But anyway, that's for another day. At some point, you're going to have to recommend something to me to even the score.
All that I would recommend right now is The Big Les Show, if you ever have time to watch even just snippets of it. But, like, because that's the current thing that I'm actually, like, actively watching and I'm interested in, and kind of has me in a place where I'm learning something while I'm watching it, too. But that is a whole other story for another day.
Fair enough. You're gonna have to send me a link, because I'm gonna spell it Lez like lesbian.
Yeah, that's how it is.
Oh, okay. Not that lesbian is spelled with a Z, but the slang.
No, I don't know. I thought the same thing, but I think it's just like an Australian thing.
Probably. Okay. Well, I'm interested to check it out, and I feel like I owe it to you anyway. So one way or the other, you have to send me a link. But anyway, for everybody listening, thank you for tuning in. We will be back next week. Talk to you later.
There you go.